if you could start, just tell us a little bit about Project Rescue, how it started, what drove you to start the organization, and really what you guys have seen over the last 20 years through this incredible ministry.
Well, Eric, thank you. Huge topics, right? So,
yeah, just sum it up in 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we had been working in India 20 years, doing mostly church planning and theological education. And I was more involved with the theological education part, which you mentioned your wife in the classroom and her brother as well. That's I love the classroom. But anyway, but then suddenly one of our colleagues, KK Devaraj, who was doing Teen Challenge, for the first time, we had been partnering with him, and he, for the first time, went into a red light district, one of the biggest in the world at that time, and started really just reaching out and building relationships with women in the red light district. At that time, over 100,000 women and children in that district. Wow. We were totally unaware of that world. I mean, we grew up in the church, and traditionally the church doesn't go there.
Right.
But it was amazing because immediately when he and his team reached out, and then he asked us to partner with him, because suddenly in one night of introducing women really to the one who can bring peace and hope, the only one who can, right. Jesus, women started responding who were in the most horrible, violent, unjust place one can imagine in the world. And women started responding. And their first response was to say, would you take our daughters to a place of safety? At that time, they didn't trust. They had really no hope that they could have a different future. But they said, take our daughters and please help rescue them and give them an education and a different future. It was 37 little girls the first night. And suddenly it was like, can you take them? Mm. Well, it's amazing because we had no strategy, no plan. We had never even thought of this. But in the second, immediately when Devaraj asked the question, can we take them? Immediately, both David and I had an immediate response. Absolutely. Yeah. How can we not?
Right.
And so that response, people nowadays, you look back and everyone starts with a logo and developing all the promotions and the marketing and the mission statement. And in 1 second, without any of those things, we said yes. And out of that yes, we were introduced to the darkest face of evil we had ever seen.
Wow.
And it became the first step in meeting thousands of women and children who were in sexual slavery over the years, and thousands of them who have found new life, body, mind, and spirit, new identities, come to know their identity as daughters of God. And now looking back over those years, some of the best workers today in Project Rescue are former madams that found absolute deliverance from demonic power. They were feared, and they were in brothels. And you talk about women in leadership, they had leadership gifts.
Yeah.
Where did those gifts come from? Now those gifts have been redeemed, and they are fearless. And they go into areas that most of us would be afraid to go into. And they are calling women and children out. So today we see this 23 years of women starting the journey to freedom at the darkest places in the world. There is no place so dark that the love and light of Jesus cannot shine.
Well, Beth, I can attest to that personally. You know, getting to go with Jonathan last year and a group of pastors and interact and connect. I wasn't prepared for what I was going to experience and see the people I was going to interact with there. But you're right. The light and the love of Jesus is there in the darkest places. And I guess that's one of the questions I wanted to ask was you guys have been so adamant about keeping Jesus at the center of this ministry. I think we see a lot of compassion ministries now that have popped up, even some that are outside of faith, right? And they're doing some great work. But how do you guys keep this at the center of all of this?
Sorry about
Okay,
that.
you take a call. That's all right. Yeah. How do you keep Jesus at the center of all of this? Because I think that's one thing I've seen from you guys so adamantly as you've built this ministry.
Well, let me summarize it with a little story.
Yeah.
We were in Washington, D.C. at a conference for anti-trafficking that was held at the White House.
Mm.
And so this would have been under the second Bush administration.
Okay.
And so I was asked to present on the curriculum that we had developed with other faith-based organizations. So I had someone there after I presented say, and they were with the government, they said, "This is phenomenal. The success rates of Project Rescue are phenomenal.
Mm.
If you would just downplay the Jesus part, you could raise a whole lot of money.
Mm.
We could help you." And I just looked at them and I knew the intent was very good. So I appreciated that.
Mm.
But I had to smile and say, "You don't understand. Without Jesus, we don't have rescue."
Mm.
And that's where we are.
Right.
We are desperate for him because there is a spiritual component to sexual slavery. It's not just physical.
Right.
If you just physically rescue the girl and with all best intentions, get her out of the brothel, get her out of sexual slavery to another place in the city or to another city, move her. Unless something happens to free her spirit and to free her mentally and emotionally and help her realize there's more to her than what has happened to her sexually.
Right.
She is a daughter of God, created in his image for good purposes. It's broken because we have an enemy who wants to destroy us. But the fact is, she was created for good purposes. Unless she begins to realize who she is in Jesus Christ, she will be back in bondage within months, if not weeks.
Mm.
Because she sees herself, what has happened to her in bondage has become her identity.
Yeah.
That identity has to be broken. And the only one who can break that is Jesus. Through the power of the Holy Spirit, he has the power to set her free. But I feel, how can I responsibly promise her freedom if I don't promise her Jesus?
Mm. Oh, so beautiful. I think isn't that the message of the gospel for all of us though, right? It's a regeneration of our identity, rebuilt around the centrality of Christ and the redemptive resurrection work that only he can do, So,
Right. And I think I say, I've never seen in front of your eyes, and I think you would have seen it as well, in places of great injustice and violence and this kind of exploitation, you see the worst face of evil. But you also, when you dare to go into hell and pray with a woman who's desperate for prayer and call on the name that is above every name. And in that moment, he has the power that you have carved out this sacred place around where you have invited him to come and touch this woman's life.
Mm.
And so while the evil is tangible, literally, it's suffocating. You
Yeah.
could feel it. I mean, you're in the wrong place.
Right.
But when we dare to take Jesus there in a moment,
Mm.
when we call upon his name, he's there. And so then, just as real as evil as the power and love of Jesus Christ is even more real and greater.
Mm. Oh, it's beautiful. Well, can you tell us? Can you tell us a story, maybe of a woman that has come out of sexual exploitation through the work of Project Rescue? I know there's so many. I've heard some just jaw-dropping stories of God's redemptive work in these women's lives and their children's lives. But is there one that comes to mind that you can share with us? Even anonymously.
Well, the first thing that came to mind was several little girls that I was there when they were brought out with my daughter, Rebecca. We were together. But since you mentioned a woman, and I'm going to mention one from an area that isn't quite as sensitive.
Yeah.
But when we first began in Spain, the superintendent of the Assemblies of God of Spain is Juan Carlos Escobar and his wife, Fiona. And she started seeing about 10 years ago now. She started realizing in Madrid, where they pastored, she started seeing girls on the street. And she was perplexed because most of these girls were African girls.
Mm.
And God spoke to her heart, and specifically about one girl she kept seeing. And God spoke to her about befriending her. And Fiona's courageous, and I love her because she's Scottish, and here she is in Spain, and I mean, it's a world. She's global. But God spoke to her about the one, and she reached out. And this girl's name was Beauty,
Mm.
and she had been trafficked from her nation, trafficked across the Mediterranean. And we see pictures of boats on the news with people. And it's become a pipeline of humanity from Africa to Southern Europe. This young woman would have been in the earlier parts of that, what was happening. And this girl, I mean, part of her initiation by traffickers was to put her through a voodoo ritual where powers of darkness are invited to come and really put a curse on her.
Wow.
And hold her in demonic power so that she can't run, she can't run or can't go for help, or there's this curse that her family will die.
Mm.
And so the traffickers know where her family is. And so she was on the street, and as it turned out, this had happened to her. So she felt this darkness of voodooism and all of that, but she was aware of God. So very sad, here she knew of God, but she's been forced to undergo this kind of demonic ritual. And so Fiona started ministering to her and offered to help her. She was pregnant. Well, to make a long story short, Fiona kept ministering. They brought her into the safe place, started a shelter and a safe place, and got some godly women in the local church to help. And she started working with her. And over time, she was delivered, beautifully, beautifully delivered of all demonic power, full of Jesus, full of his love. She's a beautiful, beautiful woman of God today.
Mm.
She has 2 children. A wonderful young man came along, and that second son is with her husband, this man of God. And she got involved. I mean, from the beginning, Fiona said, took her coming out of darkness one day of the week, and the next Sunday, you're in the house of God.
Yeah.
And seeking after God and having people pray, trust God for you on the healing journey. And I love that because the community of faith is critical.
Yeah.
This battle can't happen alone. It has to happen surrounded by people who believe in healing and believe you have a different future. And so today she has been trained as a geriatric nurse. Beauty is a geriatric nurse. She's professional, 2 children, a husband, and they're very involved in their local church.
Wow.
So that's what God can do, taking
Yeah.
her right off the street, out of hell. And she's a daughter of God.
It's resurrection, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely.
So right now there's an interesting opportunity, and we've talked about it here. What's happening with Forever Free? I think so many people resonated with this, on the ministry aspect alone. But I think so many people are overwhelmed with all that's happening with coronavirus and the shutdowns and the economic distress and everything that's going along with that. And so to see some type of redemption story emerging directly from the impact of coronavirus, I think has really resonated with a lot of people. So can you tell us a little bit about Forever Free, how God is in essence redeeming this horrific COVID shutdown that's happening to do something beautiful in Southeast Asia?
Absolutely. Back in March, when things started happening with COVID, 2 of the places that there was an immediate problem were Europe, Southern Europe especially, and Southern Asia. And the fear, the fear was palpable, and there was reason for fear because of the sheer numbers of people and the closeness of people in those cultures. And so very quickly we got word. I think it was in March that in prayer we had felt strongly God telling us personally. I was in prayer and we were under lockdown and in quarantine. And I felt very strongly, I felt God saying, Beth, I've never called you to put safety first. I've called you to stay not safe, but to stay ready. I'm at work. Don't miss what I'm going to do. Don't miss it. Live ready. Well, it was so clearly from the Lord. It was so clear. So I shared it with our Project Rescue team. We got on a Zoom video conferencing call with all our India leaders and shared this with them because all of a sudden they were locked down. Things were locked down. And so we shared this message. We all prayed. Well, it was very shortly after that, within weeks, that we started getting the reports that out of fear of passing COVID, that not only had people, the average person, been locked down in the nation, everything was locked down. And that included the red light districts. Brothels were locked down. So the
First time in 500 years, right? Or whatever. First time in our known history.
Absolutely. We know no other time in history that has happened. And of course, because there's global awareness of the problem, there's global awareness of response. And so suddenly these were locked down, and the women were either, if they stayed, they have no customers and they have no money and no way of getting food. And so the doors were opened in the brothel so that they were just told, you can leave, do whatever you want, go wherever you want to go because we can't help you and we can't do anything. So they opened the doors, and suddenly we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of women who are leaving what has been their prison and walking out freely. But where do they go? So they are marked. Even the way they dress, the way they look, the way they walk, everything about them says this is a woman. This is one of those women.
Right.
And so what happened though is this stream of humanity, they're trying to find food for their families. How they survived? Many of them had no choice but to start back toward their villages. Meanwhile, ministry directors with Project Rescue were keeping touch with the women in the districts that they knew. Thank God for technology, right? So they were keeping touch and they heard what was happening. And so they started trying to get food and supplies out and taking a risk personally with their staff to get out where these women were coming and leaving and trying to help them. And so all of a sudden, sometimes it's women they had connected with years before that they knew when they were younger and they've tried to keep touch with. Suddenly those women are saying, can you help me get out? I don't want to ever go back to this life. Can you help me have freedom? And of course, they need everything. They need a meal. They need food. They need a place to go. They need vocational training. They need a job until they get vocational training. How are they going to make income? So God said, stay ready, right? He was right.
Yep,
So
usually is.
we are suddenly going, okay, they're calling us saying, can you help us? We are potentially talking hundreds of women like that. We have a window of a couple weeks. Originally, we had a couple weeks in some areas. Because if the woman doesn't get help, she's going to have to find another way to feed her children. And what are her options? And so suddenly we started appealing to friends and we thought, okay, can we do a virtual fundraising event? And of course, conventional wisdom back in March, April, May, and June was don't ask anybody for anything.
Right. Yeah, no doubt.
That the prognosis and the economic forecast was very bleak for America and other places as well. So we had been calling churches and leaders and pastors and people who are partners and not asking for anything, just saying, we're concerned about you and your families and your churches. Can we pray with you? So we did that probably for 6 weeks. And then this happened. And so we said, okay, with Pastor Rob Lloyd, do we dare let's throw it out there and see what happens? So we were stunned because Pastor Eric, conventional wisdom would say in a crisis, you kind of hold back. You wait and see. You're cautious financially. We saw the strongest response to a call for help in the middle of COVID crisis. Back in June, July, it was the largest response for an appeal for help for Project Rescue we've seen in 23 years. In the middle.
It's unbelievable. The numbers
the middle of the storm.
Yeah, the numbers were staggering, and I think what is it? It's like $1,542 or something like that, if I remember the numbers correctly, right?
Yes.
To get a woman housing, vocational training, healthcare for her and her kid, and just completely transform and move them into a new aspect of life, right?
Yes. And everything, right down to the end of the Forever Free, that virtual event, which none of us had ever done. And we were all in different places getting on to present. And at the last minute, Pastor Rod Loy, he was supposed to start and he wasn't there. Where he was, he lost all power. One of the greatest, yes, one of the greatest systems you could have. We had run through this several times with the technology, and all of a sudden he's texting and saying, I have no power.
Oh, no.
No power. And it's like he's got his cell phone. That's it. He's got his iPhone. And so we said, okay, we go for it. And it's like, Lord, okay, this is God.
Yeah.
There's no other way this is going to happen. It's God.
Well, it's been beautiful to watch from my seat, just to see how people have responded. But also, I just think people want, they're scared, they're overwhelmed, they're frustrated from a medical standpoint, from an economic standpoint. And so to see some beautiful, God just turning ashes into beauty, which is what he does. And I think people just wanted to be a part of that. I know everyone that we were around that heard about what was happening with Forever Free wanted to be engaged and involved. And so it's just such a beautiful story how God uses something that we could never see any beauty in. He uses it to do something dramatic, and so it's incredible.
Well, I guess it's not the first time he's shaken prison doors and
Yep.
brought the chains off and set people free. And this was very, very stunningly in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
The other thing is, someone has said that what we are doing is during this time of crisis, and it is crisis. It's a global crisis, very real. But at the same time, as people of God, we can choose. Be aware of this. We're living here, but at the same time, let us not miss. And this is part of what I felt the Lord saying. Don't miss what I'm doing. This is happening,
Yeah.
but don't miss what I'm doing. And we can choose to live and walk on this parallel track. It's at the same time. But we see what we look for. And if I am looking for the hand of God
Mm.
and seeing God at work, we are seeing God at work. And so I pray that I know you and Stone Table and the congregation you're a part of, and other Stone Table congregations, and many friends of ours, they've been choosing to walk here.
Yeah.
And boy, it's one of the most exciting times I've ever seen in my lifetime.